1962, my mom and dad bought 6 acres out on Napier Road, which was virtually the wilderness, and they built a house out there. And we moved in November of 1962. It was rainy, cold, and muddy, and they couldn't get the refrigerator and stuff down the driveway. The house is 500 feet off the road in the woods. And so Mom put the eggs and milk and bacon and butter and stuff out on the porch to keep it cold. And the raccoons had breakfast. So that was our first day at the house. I was in kindergarten here in Canton and went to Gallimore School. The bus picked us up and we drove to Gallimore. Every single mile of the road between our house on Napier and Gallimore on Sheldon was nothing but cornfields. The house we grew up in was in the woods. The north side of the property was all field, and the south side of the property was all hardwood forest. And so we grew up with, tree forts and paths through the woods, and we learned all of the wildflowers, all the birds, most of the trees. We'd go out and pick wild asparagus. My father knew about wild mushrooms. We would pick wild mushrooms. Good thing we didn't die. We didn't have a ton of spare time because my mother was kind of a taskmaster. So she had a big garden. So we spent a lot of our free time weeding because that's just the way our family was. If you got time, then you can find a chore to do, When I was about 9 years old, almost 10, I had every night went to bed praying for a horse. Please, Jesus, bring me a horse. And so when I was almost 10 years old, my father bought me a horse, and where he was building his shop in Romulus, there was a farm next door, and they had a horse, and they were selling her. She was she was an old horse. She was just a grade horse. She was a retired cow pony. She had a brand on her shoulder. And for $200, I got the horse, the saddle, the bridle, and the halter. And I thought she was magnificent, and she was. And she was a Palomino. And so we boarded her at the neighbors next door, and until we could build our barn. And then we got the barn, and then my free time was made up with her, taking care of her. I had to clean stalls, haul hay, feed, water, and then we rode miles and miles and miles. There were a lot of other kids in the area that had horses. As we lived there longer, by the time I was 10, I moved there when I was 5, and by the time I was 10, there were a lot of neighbors. And a lot of them had horses too. So there was any time you could see, 20 of us riding down the road on horses. So, and then a lot of us had above ground pools. So my dad bought a used above ground pool, and we never had anything new. We always had, whatever. He was a deal maker. And so we had an above ground pool. A lot of the neighbors did too. So we'd go for a ride, come back, strip our clothes off, have our bathing suits underneath, go swimming for a while, get dressed, get on the horses, go for another ride, and until we got called in for, you have to do your chores. And so that was nice. And I had a little dog. I had Hobo. She was a stray. All of our animals have been strays. And she would go with me if I went by myself. And you can imagine, being 14 years old and I'd just be out riding the roads all by myself. Now you imagine some kid doing that today on a bicycle or something like that. Parents would be apoplectic. But Hobo would go with me. She's just a little black shaggy dog, and she would follow along behind. We never chained our dogs up or fenced them in or anything. And as she got older, she'd get tired, and she'd get farther and farther behind Goldie. And so I'd wait for her to get caught up, and I'd pat Goldie on the shoulder, and Hobo would put her paws up, and I'd pick her up and throw her over the saddle like a cowboy would do a calf. and ride her home that way because she was just wiped out. Too many miles for her. And so that's the way I spent my growing up. You know, we had to work. I had jobs when I started work when I was 14, and babysat a lot. There weren't very many people that were around to do babysitting, so I was like the premier babysitter. 50 cents an hour, regardless of how many families I was taking care of. I could have 2 families. Instead of making $1 an hour, I made 50 cents an hour for 2 families, so they got me for 25 cents an hour. When I was little, we went to Plymouth, and you know, there was I think it was the Stop and Go or something like that, where on Forest Street was the grocery store, and Cloverdale's was across the street. And you know, if all the stars aligned, my mother might stop in and let me have an ice cream. And barber shop and hair salons were there. The bank was in Plymouth, that kind of thing. And then as time went on, they built Westland Mall, which was just like, you know, it was like the most exciting thing in the world was Westland Mall, and Hudson's was there, and so we would go to Westland to shop for clothes. But growing up, my mom made most of our clothes, and the good thing was that she was a good seamstress, so I didn't look quite so, you know, homemade clothes. But homemade clothes, and my grandmother was the champion mender. So if you had a pair of socks that got worn out, she would keep mending your socks until eventually you had a ball on the end of your sock like this. Because God forbid she wouldn't throw it out as long as there was a fiber she could get a hold of with her needle. But everybody kind of knew everybody. I mean, you know, if you didn't know them personally, you knew who they were. And, you know, they talk about traffic today. You know, traffic back then was tractors and combines and things like this going down the roads. All dirt roads everywhere. Ford Road was paved, and there were a few paved roads, but everything else was just dirt. And in the wintertime, when it would snow heavy, you could be in for days before Wayne County would come out and get the main roads cleared off. And I can remember my dad, we had bad snowstorm, and my dad went to work, and we lived a mile north of Ford Road, and he got to Ford Road and could get to work, but he couldn't get back down Napier. And so he was walking in from Ford and Napier Road, and I would go out to meet him on the horse and walk with him back from Ford Road. And because Goldie could make it through the snow because it was knee deep to her, but you know, it was. And but it was all farms. There was Julian's Market. It was on the corner. It was a big deal. We would go down there and get our gas, and you know, if you had a tire punctured or whatever, they would fix things like that. They had a little, you know, auto shop there, and you know, some convenience, you get milk or whatever. And they had pre-dipped ice cream cones, which was a big thrill. I think they were 50 cents, and I could usually talk my dad into getting me. Ice cream was a big factor in my life growing up, and he thought they were horrible, but I thought they were wonderful. And we had farm stands. You know, we used to, when my mom and dad were building the house, there was a farm stand where Myers gas station is now. And they built like a brick barbecue kind of a thing, not a formal one like you see in some houses, but they built like a temporary place to have like a barbecue. My mom would go out and cook lunch for the guys, because my mom and dad were the contractors on the house. They subbed everybody out. So she'd bring lunch out for the guys, and she'd stop at the stand where Myers gas station is and buy corn and tomatoes and things like that. And there was a big old house around the corner that was part of that farm. And so, yeah, we lived off of the garden, we lived off the farm stands. My first job was my girlfriend's dad had a pizza shop in Ann Arbor, DJ's Pizza. So the two of us were 14. And he would take us in on Friday and Saturday nights, and we would answer the phone. We were counter girls, answer the phone and take orders and things like that. And, you know, that was very exciting, very exciting. And then I started, my first real job was at Richardson's Pharmacy. I worked there as a cashier. And then I worked at the farm, the Hauk farm next door. I bagged corn and melons, and I started dating their son, who was, we grew up together from 5 years old. We went to church here at the Little Cherry Hill Church. And so I started working at the farm, and then when we got old enough, we would take the corn and the melons and stuff down to the Eastern Market at dark 30 in the morning. We'd get up at, I'd get up at like 1 o'clock or 1:30 and come over here and get him up, and we'd get in the truck and we'd drive to Eastern Market. And that was before 275 was in, so we had to take Ford Road down to, I think down to Wyoming or something like that, and back the truck in. We had to be ready and to go by 3 o'clock in the morning at the market. And we'd sit there on the back of the truck and sell the bags of corn and the crates of melons and stuff. We'd have a wad of cash like this in our front pockets, our blue jeans. There weren't any women on the market. There was one woman who smoked cigars and had a beard, and there was the green bean lady, and that was about it. And then there was me, you know, 17 years old. I grew up here. It was a very different place. You know, I always tell people there were more cows than people, you know. How many people here in Canton can say that they used to stand across the street from the bus stop and the calves, we'd get the calves to suck our thumb, and we'd have calf slobber all up our arms while we were waiting for the, you know, because they have that rough, slimy tongue. Those were experiences that nobody else will have in Canton anymore. Oh, I miss the countryside. I really do. You know, sitting here in this house, you know, across the street would be the early corn would go in, and because it's sandy here. And so they could get the corn in right away and get the early corn. And in the spring, you know, you'd see them go out and put the corn, you know, plant the corn, and then you'd see that green fuzz start over the fields, you know. And I don't know, there was just something very reassuring that spring was back, you know, to see the corn. And I just miss the wide open spaces, you know. So I drive out to Washtenaw County, drive around out there. And that's, if you drive just past Napier Road and out, you know, Godfredson and Vreeland Road and those places, it's just how Canton used to be. I somehow ended up doing some guest articles for the Crier newspaper in Plymouth. And I did things on, you know, historical stuff and whatever, and I would write little articles and they'd be published in the paper, and that kept me involved. I started volunteering with the Historical Society and did a lot of work for them. Yeah, and because Dorothy West lived right across the street, and she was involved with the Historical Society, so I got involved with that. And then I got appointed to the Historic District Commission. I think it was I want to say it was 84, 85 when I got appointed to the Historic District Commission. And then Ian was born in 86. So I was busy with those things. I did a lot of volunteer work, and the good thing about volunteer work is you throw your kid in the back seat and just keep going. So I put a lot of miles on that kid. That was Lauren Bennett's fault. Terry Bennett was appointed to the Historic District Commission too, and we had a special and Lauren was elected to the clerk's as the clerk in '88, and so in 1990 or something like that, we had to have, or 91, I don't remember. No, must have been 90. We had to have a special election because our Wayne County Commissioner had, something happened to our Wayne County Commissioner. We had to replace him, so we had to have a special election to replace the Wayne County Commissioner. So Lauren comes up to me and he says, I want you to be a precinct chair. And I go, I can't be a precinct chair. I'm a housewife. What do I know? He goes, you'll be fine. And I didn't want to do it. I was afraid. And so he forced me. And so I did it. And nobody died. And everybody's vote got counted. So that was a good thing. And so then we had a township trustee resign. And they had to replace the township trustee. And Lauren said, I want to nominate you for the replacement for the township board. I can't do that. Oh yeah, you'll be fine. So I was nominated. And there was another, John Birdziak was nominated. He was on the planning commission. And so there was quite a bit of back and forth, but the board decided that John Birdziak was the better choice than me, so I lost that battle. And so then there was a spot on the planning commission that needed to be filled. So then Lauren said, I'm going to get you on the planning commission. So in '91, I was appointed to the planning commission, and I served on that until 2016. And then in '92, there were board seats that were open, trustee seats. And Lauren said, I want you to run for trustee. I can't possibly do that. You'll be fine. And so I'm shy. And nobody believes that. I am. I'm terribly shy. If I'm in a group, I'm usually close to the door so that I can just exit stage left. And I can get up and talk in front of 100 people with no problem, but one-on-one conversations I'm uncomfortable with unless I know the people. And so he made me do it. And I kept saying to myself, if you don't do something that scares you to death every now and then, how are you going to make sure you're alive? And it scared me to death. And I ran and I won. I was the highest vote getter. And so I served on the township board from '92 until 2016. I don't know, there was a couple different things. I think I did some pretty good things when it came to planning. I was involved in the I first learned about open space preservation in through historic preservation. And so we incorporated, it took a while to get people to agree to it because the planning commission didn't, I was before even on the planning commission. Planning commission didn't want to do open space preservation. And then once I got on the planning commission, I said, this is what we're going to do. And so we incorporated early in the '90s open space preservation as part of the site plans for most developments. And I think that was pretty significant. We really worked hard to build better looking subdivisions. Landscaping, a higher level of architecture, you know, instead of just, I mean, they'll put up whatever they can get away with putting up and people will buy whatever it is. And I said, you know, if we want this community to have lasting value, it's got to have classical designs. It's got to have some architectural strength. And so we beat them up hard to get better architecture, better site planning, things like that. I drive around through Canton Township now and I look at the subdivisions that went in that were some of the first ones that I was involved in, you know, approving and things like this. And now that they're mature, now that they're 20 years old, 25 years old, you know, I said, yeah, we did this right. You know, they're a good thing. And then I think the historic preservation stuff, you know, Canton was just mowing down old houses and you know, there was very little motivation to save any of them. And we really, you know, stood strong to try to save at least some parts of Cherry Hill Village. And, you know, we stood strong, you know, we moved the Bartlett Travis house and did the preservation park and the barn, things like that. And the idea is that, you know, we needed to have We needed to have that touch base back to say, you know, we aren't all just Pulte houses. You know, we at one time were something, you know, more important. And so the Bartlett Travis House, the Cherry Hill School, you know, and then there were other buildings that were private properties that I advocated for people to get, you know, their homes restored, help them. Joe Van Esley, I helped him with his house, you know, his office on Joy Road and things like that. I loved working in government. I loved working in Canton Township. It was such a treat, such an honor, you know, I was so thrilled that I was able to do it. I loved helping people. I loved being involved in the decision making and in the planning, you know, and all the aspects of government. And I worked with some fantastic people. I mean, the people that were on the board and things like this, marvelous, marvelous people.